Researching the Heart. And today I would like to do a brief, thoughtful and soul-searching episode on Nigeria, and I would like to be looking into the issue of democracy. Okay, we'll be doing a kind of a historical analysis of the Nigerian context, the issues that one needs to look at when he's talking about leadership in Nigeria and democracy in Nigeria. These are some of the issues that keep on coming up. So I just want to help us, those of us that are interacting with Nigerian democracy, with the people of Nigeria, whether in the areas of culture, of economics, politics, that we'll have a better understanding of the context, so that we do not add to the problems of a country that is trying to move forward. Okay, so please follow me on this brief kind of exegesis and exposition of the Nigerian situation. Good afternoon. Again, like I said, we'll be looking at Nigeria and democracy. Okay, I felt it's necessary to talk about this because we keep on coming back. It's like because of the global village and the things happening all over the world, there's a constant need to continuously come back and discuss these issues. They really help the people involved, especially, to understand their own situation. Many times I discover that people just follow the motions. Okay, something comes, you just get involved, you believe that of course this thing is common to all of us, and you start participating in it, and you don't really understand. You are not able to actually x-ray, look inwards and find out, why am I responding to this thing like this? Should I be responding to this thing like this? And sometimes it creates problems, and we all participate in the problems, and of course if we don't have the solutions, of course it might spell catastrophe. So I want to look at that, Nigeria and democracy. Okay, we can all trace our history, at least most of us that are old enough to do so, from independence 1960 right through, of course, a few years of practicing the parliamentary system, where we had 3 major regions, and of course after then the military took over, and the civil war began, and that created a very long period of military dictatorship in Nigeria. And there was a handover to civilian rule briefly for about 5 years, and then another 3 years, it wasn't up to 5 years, about 3 years, and another military dictatorship took over again, very briefly, another one again, and there was another long spell of dictatorship, which most Nigerians at this time will resonate with and can remember very well. And then came the Abacha regime, and then the transition to civil rule again. And from then, which was 1999, we have been under civil rule up to this time. It's quite a long time, and some people will consider that impressive and believe that it's success. But also, if you've watched my previous videos, you agree with me that there are still issues that come up now and then. And for me personally, I believe that some of the problems we're still struggling with are the things we have not been able to solve through that period of military rule. Okay, and in fact, we are still used to some things we learned during the military rule, and we have not yet been able to let go of those things. And we can keep on talking about these things, but today I want to take a different approach. And look at Nigeria and democracy. In these close to about 24 years or so of democracy, 25 years of democracy, what can we say about Nigeria and democracy? Of course, there are events that are happening now that people ask the question, okay, what is really going on? You can see certain things playing. Sometimes we're in a hurry to compare Nigeria with the United States of America. And I will always call us to caution that is not ideal, okay? Because the United States of America has a democracy that has been going on for more than 200 years. Nigeria, on the other hand, just 1960, it was 6 decades or so, close to 6 decades, okay? So this is the thing. We need to understand what we are talking about. Okay, are we really matured in our democracy? What are the things that actually influence our democracy? Very important. Okay, so let us look at what was Nigeria before democracy came. What was really Nigeria? What was Nigeria before democracy was established? And remember, the form of democracy we started with was the British-style democracy. Before that began, the British discovered that they came to a land that shared, a similar culture with their own land. Okay, though they were hundreds of years more advanced than us in the practice of democracy, but they felt they had some kind of similarity with us in the fact that they practiced a form of monarchy, and most of the tribes and peoples they found in Nigeria were practicing the same model of government. And of course, there existed feudal states. Of course, you can name quite a few of those feudal states, like the Benin Kingdom, the Ife Kingdoms, the Kano Emirates, Bauchi Emirates, the Borno Emirates, the Sokoto Emirates, and of course we know that the Ottoman Danfodio jihad was going on at that time. Okay, so they found a system that was similar to theirs. Apart from these chieftaincies and emirates, there were smaller arrangements, of course, that were not really recorded in history at that time, but they were little city-states all over the Middle Belt region, and even down south, the Igbo city-states and the Middle Belton city-states, So all these arrangements were working on perfect, sometimes in relation to one another, but independent states. And the aim of the jihad was to unite some of these smaller city-states to the Kano, Bauchi, and Bauchi Emirates. Okay, so that was what was going on at that time. So we had these going on, and the British, of course, felt that okay, their own system of government would resonate with these people. Okay, but of course we have to remember that they were far more. They had been practicing democracy for hundreds of years before that time. Okay, so it was totally. Though they had that, we had that similarity with them. We were people that had never really encountered democracy as a system. Okay, we operated in feudal states and small city-states, and mostly some were just village arrangements that were related with one another. People that felt they had a common homogeneous identity, whether tribal, okay, or so, and they lived together in dispersed groups. So this is the issue at stake. So all these people, whether feudal or chieftaincies, small chieftaincies, all practice a form of African traditionalism at that time. Okay, and these forms of government were similar in one way or the other, in that a particular religion governed in the system of government. Okay, the religion was very much tied to the politics. Okay, so they were interwoven. So this was what was popular then. This what is called traditionalism. Okay, if you hear me talk about traditionalism, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Christian traditionalism, no. I'm not talking about Islamic traditionalism. No. I'm talking about African traditional religion. If you go to a place like India, you can talk about the Hindu, okay, religion. But in Africa, there is a system that was almost common. They practiced different ways. They had differences, a lot of differences. But when you look at it as a whole, scholars have agreed that this can be put under an umbrella called African traditional religion. Okay, so yes, Christianity was there in pockets. Of course, we know about the Nubian kingdoms that practice Christianity. We know about the Ethiopian kingdoms that practice Christianity. Of course, in Egypt before Islam came. Okay, but most of other parts of Africa practice some form of traditionalism. Okay, and this traditionalism has pillars. Some of the pillars of traditionalism were, number one, respect for elders. Some people will call this a patriarchal system, okay, or a matriarchal system. There was patriarchal hierarchy and there is matriarchal hierarchy. A combination of both. Of course, sometimes the patriarchal system was more dominant, but the matriarchal system was also there within. There is no African culture that you see that is just the patriarchal system alone. You know, as opposed to what some scholars might say, most African systems have a combination. It's just that the patriarchal system might dominate. Okay, so respect for elders he was one very, very important precept in this. Okay, of course, the nuclear and extended families. Now, when you look at Christianity, you discover that nuclear family is more prominent. Okay, it is not that it does not exist within the traditional system. Yes, it does, but in the traditional system, the extended family sort of has not merely a greater importance, but is on equal footing most of the time. Yes, it is on equal footing. In some cases, you might think that the extended family is more important than the nuclear family, but that is just because it's a kind of reaction to Christian culture. Okay, when some people feel that Christian culture is over impeding in their way of life, they react, and it looks like the extended family becomes very important. But that is not so. These two things are on equal footing in the normal traditional African traditional religion. Okay, they are on equal footing, and well, what it means is that, of course, sometimes it looks like the extended family is more important. Okay, so this is what the traditional system is about. Okay, and within this family system, we've discovered that polygamy tends to be the most prevalent form of marriage that is practiced. Okay, polygamy tends to be the most prevalent form of marriage that is practiced, and just like the relationship between the extended and the nuclear family, the polygamous system tends to just pervade, even though there might be people who are monogamous, okay, within the system. Okay, so that is just what is happening here. Okay, and of course, within the political system is governed by a religion, a local religion that is practiced by most of the people who live in that place. Some people might call it folk religion, which means that different gods, a realm of gods, are accepted into the system, but sometimes it might be just one. for that very tribe. Okay, it might be even a monotheistic religion, but it is only unique to that people or that tribe itself. Okay, so this is what the pillars of traditionalism are. Respect for elders, which promotes the patriarchal and the matriarchal hierarchy, emphasis on the family, mostly the extended family, even though the nuclear family does exist, and of course the practice of polygamy, even though monogamous relationships do exist. Okay, and all this is governed by a homogeneous religious system that may practice either polytheism or monotheism, and this is what the pillars of traditional religion are.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.
Okay. So now, of course, what we know in this light is that, of course, Islam began to take over a very large part of the African continent. Of course, very early in the conquest of the Prophet Muhammad himself, after he took over Mecca and Medina, he began to come down south. Okay, of course, he went up north, and some of the resistance he faced up north in France, especially, pushed him down south, and because of that, he took over Alexandria and Egypt, came down, fought Nubia for a long time. After a while, he took over Nubia. And after the military conquest of Islam died down, Islam adopted a more missionary form of engagement with the African continent. And because of that, it was able to infiltrate down to Mali, down into West Africa. You know, even though pockets of Christianity existed, especially in Ethiopia. Okay, so this is what was going on. Okay, and this is the route through which the Usman Dan Fodio Jihad began in northern Nigeria, and began to take over the kingdoms of northern Nigeria and began to come down south. Okay, so that also attracted, of course, Islam interacted with Western Christianity. Although it knew of the existence of African Christianity in Ethiopia and in Egypt, and in places like Sudan, but it had created such a niche for itself that it was focused mainly on the Western form of Christianity, and there was that kind of rivalry. So when Christianity came through colonialism, into Africa, these two religions began to compete for territory. And of course, at that time, the British and most of the colonial powers had already reached that point in which they did not believe that it was necessary again to come through violence. Okay, the Crusades, the years of the Crusades were long gone, and of course they believed that they should be impartial arbiters. And that's why when you look at the records during the colonial period, they were often exchanges between the Christian missionaries and the British authorities, because some of the officers that were the British that worked with the British government felt that Christianity must not be imposed on the people, and so they created a kind of level playing ground. Okay, that is what enabled them to stop the movement of the jihad. Okay, because they put up a face of neutrality. Okay, so this is what happened. Although, of course, they were actively engaged in protecting the Christian missionaries that were coming from the West also. And the idea was to create that balance, okay, that level playing ground, because Islam was already dominant. So this is what was going on. So the inroads of the two religions, which are more amenable to traditionalism, kind of created an atmosphere in which the people could quickly move from their practice of traditionalism that emphasized the patriarchal and matriarchal hierarchy, the nuclear and extended families, and was generally religious. That kind of chimed with the religions that existed, Islam and Christianity. And so, of course, those two religions became very powerful. Okay, so they became very powerful in that sense. And the problem with this is that it was not very clear if the people had indeed accepted democracy or not. Okay, this was deception that existed. Many people just assumed that the acceptance of Christianity meant that it was a wholesale acceptance of Western culture. Okay, and others that were involved in Islam, of course, Islam has different dictates. Of course, sometimes there is the issue of compulsion in there and everything. Okay, they just assumed that yes, there was this, forceful compromise with Western beliefs and systems, but of course their mind was totally on the Islamic way of life. And this was the dilemma that Nigeria faced. That's why you found that in the northern region, of course, education was not very much, Western education was not emphasized, while the Southerners embraced Western education, because in the South, Christianity was far more popular than in the North. Okay, of course, the North being the middle belt, and of course we know that there's a lot of Christianity also in the middle belt, and parts of the North also. So this is what was going on there, and because of this acceptance of sort of blind acceptance of Western culture, people assumed that they actually had embraced Western culture and in fact democracy. Okay, and it was very wise, in my opinion, of the British to establish the system which they did, which chimed with their own country, the parliamentary system of government, which allowed the traditional rulers to participate, and allowed the more homogeneous regions to maintain their identity and still participate in government. This had its disadvantages economically, okay, because the North was more conservative in that sense, okay, and the South was more progressive. Yeah, so this had its disadvantages, but in terms of the mindset and development of people, it was far more ideal. Now the problem of course, of human beings is that, of course, economics plays a very, very powerful role in the lives of human beings, and this was what created the Civil War, led to the Civil War, because of the rivalry in economics of two different tribes. You can read about that in your spare time. Now, before I continue, let me just make a brief remark about this rivalry between socialism and capitalism. And this This is a very, 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 very deep rivalry that has successfully hidden itself in the Nigerian polity, and it is now in the life of Nigeria that we are seeing this rivalry come up. And of course, we are wondering where it's going to take us. We have discovered that most of us who have discovered this have discovered that we need to face this thing head on. Okay, Nigeria needs to choose between capitalism and socialism, and this is what is going on right now. But this is not our focus for today. We are talking about Nigerian democracy. Although it is very important, because we know that the democratic systems work better under capitalism. Okay, so this is very important, and when we understand this, we will know the issues at stake. Now, the reason why this economic rivalry hid even after the the Civil War, is because of the fact that many Nigerians did not really were not able to really sit down and x-ray and find out, have I really accepted this Western culture that I claim to want to live by, while accepting religions like Christianity? They were not really sure. They did not really understand that some of their desire for Christianity was coming from the traditional mindset, the love for the family, the respect for elders, and of course love for religion generally. Okay, push them towards Christianity, some towards Islam, but mainly Christianity. And in Christianity, there's a kind of acceptance of Western culture, and in that sense, of course, you think that you have really imbibed Western culture, which is democracy. But what we discover is that the truth is that many of the Nigerian people did not really chime with democracy. They accepted the status quo. Some of them, running away from Islam, were just happy to accept Western culture, but in truth really did not understand what it demanded of them. And they soon found out, when the issues of women emancipation came up. That is number one. Number two, the issue of children being educated. When you send your children to school, they go and they learn all sorts of things, okay? And many of those things not really Christian. And they come back and, their view of life is kind of changed, and they begin to question certain things, even Christian tradition. And it becomes an issue. And so many people were forced to begin to really look and say, do I really accept this Christianity with all this garbage? They began to ask themselves. And this led, and it has led to the process we find ourselves in, okay, at this time. Okay? And we find so many people begin to ask questions about socialism and capitalism, wondering whether, historically Africa, many African nations have tended to side with socialism, tending to side with communism, the Soviet Union, at the time it was still there. And we know today, of course, the issue of flying Russian flags, in different countries. So this is the issue. Many people are going to side with a more conservative form of democracy, okay, which is more social in nature rather than capitalism, rather than democracy that emphasizes human rights, freedom of speech, and freedom of opinion, freedom of association, and all that. Okay, so this is the problem that is at stake. So after this, we'll be looking at democracy itself and really try to x-ray and find out where the talking points are. Okay, the foundations of democracy. I'm going to try to do it from a layman's point of view, okay? Populism is a part of democracy, though it is not ideal, but it is, especially in the parliamentary system. You see why the British introduced the parliamentary system instead of the presidential system in Nigeria, because they were already practicing that and they introduced it here. So populism is part of democracy, okay? Majority carries the vote, of course. Two, freedom of association, okay? Yeah. everybody can associate, including marriage, okay, with anybody he wants to associate with. Okay. Now this brings up questions as to religion also, and that's why there is freedom of religion, so that whatever hindrances or there are to that freedom of association will be guided by whatever religion a person chooses to practice. Okay. Number 3, freedom of speech and opinion. We've talked about freedom of religion. Okay, of course, that is number 3. Number 4 is freedom of speech and opinion. Okay, yeah, free speech, the press. People have a right to information, have a right to share with one another, to know what is going on in government. Free enterprise, the right to buy and sell, trade. Of course, we know Islam encourages a lot of trade, but under certain religious guiding. And of course, certain tribes like the Igbos were very trade savvy. Okay, we have smaller tribes also within the country that are also trade savvy. Okay. 5, inclusion. Okay, democratic practice inclusion. Of course, we'll look whether these traditional systems actually encourage some of these things. And this is the next question we're going to be asking. Okay. And the last one is human rights. We've talked about freedom of religion already. Human rights. And human rights means the right to life, the right to basic needs, human needs, like housing, like food, water, basic amenities, all that. And so these are the pillars of democracy and the foundations of democracy, as it were. Okay. Now the question we want to ask is, do these traditional systems that were popular among the people, for which they accepted Christianity and Islam, were they really in tandem with these democratic values? And this is the thing that many people began to ask themselves. By experience, they were forced to ask themselves, are these things really in tandem with what we believe and want to practice? Okay? And we have to look at these one after the other. And first of all, we have to start with populism. Okay, majority carries the vote. Yes, in many societies, there is that belief that, of course, the majority of people, whatever the majority believes, should stand. Very few societies are purely patriarchal, like I've said, or matriarchal societies, where they can trace their ancestry to one patriarch, and it's whatever that patriarch says that they follow. Are very few. Okay, most societies believe in populism. They believe that whatever is acceptable among the majority will practice. Okay, well, of course there are exceptions, but this is generally so. Okay, and that is why some people believe that even during the military regime, like the Babangida regime, like the Gowon regime, there was some form of democracy going on underneath. Okay, so the next one is freedom of association. Okay, of course we know that many tribes were kind of segregated peoples. Okay, except the larger emirates and kingdoms. Of course, they believed in assimilation. If they conquered smaller tribes, they assimilated them. Yes, and that was going on. But a lot of tribes were segregated peoples. They were peoples that stayed to themselves. And if you were traveling between the boundaries, of course, one thing we have to understand, though, is that contrary to the belief that some of the colonialists had when they came to Africa, that these people never communicated nor traded with one another, it was not really so. Okay, many of the tribes allowed travel, especially within the leaders, between the boundaries of these different tribes. It was happening, and they had trade relationships. So this is the issue at stake. Okay, so but there was lesser freedom of association. Of course, lesser freedom of association. In some situations, if you strayed out of your boundaries and you found yourself in another enclave, you could die, you could lose your life. That is where the head hunting tradition comes from. Okay, do not stray out of your boundaries, because if you are found in another boundary, nobody can claim you. You could be killed. Okay, and it was a way of even starting wars. Many of the people started wars between one another by hunting, people from the opposite tribe. Okay, so this was going on. No freedom of association, limited freedom of association, freedom of speech and opinion. Okay, there was very limited freedom of speech and opinion because of the more patriarchal or matriarchal hierarchies that were going on. As freedom of speech was limited. Okay, only the elder can speak in a public space. Okay, only the elder is allowed to speak in the village square, as it is. Okay, as it were, to have an opinion as to what should be done within the community. Okay, so limited freedom of opinion, no freedom of opinion at all. Free enterprise was limited, of course, to allowable trade partnerships within tribes. Of course, within the tribe itself, yes, there was a kind of freedom of enterprise. But of course, this was also limited to family lineage. If your father was a blacksmith, you would be a blacksmith. If your father was a shepherd, you would be a shepherd. If your father was a medicine person or a traditional doctor, you would be a traditional doctor. So there was that kind of limitation within the family structure. Okay, so freedom of religion. No, every tribe practiced the same religion, except in those tribes that were polytheistic. So of course, the family head would determine what god was to be worshipped. Sometimes gods were limited to women or men. Okay, the gods that women worship, the gods that men worship, and so religion was like that. But mostly within one tribe, they had a mostly homogeneous kind of religion being practiced. Okay, and human rights. Human rights were limited to the laws that govern such. Okay, within the patriarchal and matriarchal systems, human rights were governed by this strictly. Okay, and that is why many of the issues we have in the modern world today come in when you talk about human rights. Okay, because in a tyranny, okay, these things tend to happen. Okay, somebody breaks the law. Some laws were punishable. Breaking of certain laws were punishable by death. Okay, practices like female genital mutilation, killing of twins, laws concerning marriage, how they were implemented. Some cultures were more liberal in terms of marriage and divorce. Some were more strict. So these are the things that were going on. Okay, human rights was very limited. Okay, and was determined by the parents in the family setting, by the chiefs in the village setting. Okay, and in the bigger emirates, of course, by the emirs, and depending on the system that they practice. Okay, so these are the things that govern traditionalism, and that is why traditionalism does not really chime with democracy, although populism is practiced. Yes, but in many other areas, most of the other areas, traditionalism does not chime with democracy. So I'm going to round up this video by looking at the ways in which traditionalism, interact with a modern democracy. I would like to say that the traditional system, especially the one practiced in Africa at the time colonialism came, is a pre-modern system. That means it can only be equated with those systems that governed Europe between the 1st and the 5th centuries. Okay, between the 1st and the 5th centuries, most of the traditional religion practiced in Africa. Okay, now we have to understand the situation in Africa. Okay, places like Egypt, like Ethiopia, like Nubia, Africa considered itself like as a homogeneous continent, okay, because of the more populous black or a Negroid race, okay. Now, and like I said, it is a myth that the peoples of Africa never interacted with one another, okay. Yes, the patriarchs and the tribal heads were allowed to govern their little enclaves, but once in a while these people worked together, especially in the more earlier periods, okay. And of course the larger part of Africa was known as Ethiopia, okay. So the kings of Ethiopia at one time governed a very large chunk of Africa before that kingdom was separated into Nubia, Ethiopia, and of course the kingdoms of the West Africa began to have their own. Appreciate the problem that it creates in our modern setting until you know the gap between the pre-modern traditional systems that were still practiced in Africa at the time of colonialism and the modern system. Like I said, the African peoples were mostly ruled from the north, which was Ethiopia, Sudan, Tunisia, okay? Egypt a little earlier than later, okay? So because of these, they were allowed to preserve their system of life till the point where some of these kingdoms broke apart, and some of them were conquered from the north by the Arabs. And of course we know that Alexander the Great from Europe ventured down into Africa, parts of Africa, and the Romans also came into Libya. Of course we know that some of our people left Libya quite later in history, okay. So this is the issue. And so because of those cracks, okay, there were always wars. And of course the introduction of slavery complicated the whole thing and suppressed the people, and they did not have the freedom they needed to practice any form of technological or economic development. In fact, it is known within some of these tribes that they deliberately discourage innovation because they fear that it's going to bring war, okay. For them, innovation attracts war, and so they deliberately discourage it, okay. So this is the problem. I mean, we can do another topic on this on its own, okay. So this is the problem that we see, and that is why this pre-modern system was preserved. Many in areas it was actually revived and deliberately practiced, okay, in people that were already advanced. They decided to return to it because of fear of war, okay, and fear of sometimes they would attribute it to the wrath of the gods, okay. So this is what was going on, okay. So if we know the gap between modern civilization and the pre-modern, we will handle it properly. We will not treat it as if we have just suddenly shifted from, successfully shifted from that into modernism, whether through Christianity or not. Of course, there are methods through which that can be done, and I've outlined a few of them. And of course, one of them is Christian missions. Okay, Christian missions has a very deliberate plan in helping people to move from this ancient traditional practices to a more modern system. And why do they need to do this? For the sake of human rights, like we talked about. Human rights are discouraged and not practiced, okay. For the sake of free enterprise and economic development, okay. For the sake of freedom of association and freedom of speech, okay. And if you like, for the sake of democracy, a more acceptable political system that will promote human economic progress, and human dignity. Okay, so this is what is going on. Of course, a lot of people don't accept this, but of course, in that sense, we will know that that is your own point of view. But this is acceptable, that these things are good and they promote a good life for human beings. And so for that reason, Christian mission tries to hastening the process, okay, by understanding the foundations of these religions and cultures being practiced and bringing a more acceptable method of practicing whatever what one wants to practice as his own religion. But through Christianity, through Christian missions, that's achievable. Okay? Although we agree that it has not succeeded much, but that is also because of some of the misunderstanding, of course, of Christian mission itself. So this is, we've talked about that a lot of times. The second path is through anthropology, of course, social anthropology, if you like. Okay, the practice of anthropology through scientific methods does help in refining our understanding of these cultures, why they practice what they practice, and when we understand the culture better, we can interact with it better, and of course, that interaction will cause a change within the polity, and there will be improvement. Okay, and of course we know that many sociologists, anthropologists these days believe in non-interference. Okay, if you meet a culture, don't interfere in their culture. Allow them to develop by themselves. Well, there are disagreements here and there. Of course, like in Christian missions, while accepting some of the principles that these anthropologists talk about, believes that we must also try to move the people forward in their thinking. Okay, so these are the differences. Of course, politics is the more popular one. We know that sometimes politics can be colonialism itself. Yes, and this is what happened in most parts of Africa and less developed countries. So colonialism was used to establish political systems, interact with the people politically, and of course encourage their movement from these traditional methods, okay, to more modern methods. Of course, sometimes traditional methods have a direct correlation to modern methods, and there is no conflict whatsoever. So this is the issue, and of course we see this happening. So democracy in Nigeria is actually determined by these things we've talked about, and mostly a lot of people live in the traditional belief systems up to today, and this really hinders their practice of democracy. And sometimes it is a delusion to believe that Nigeria practices ideal democracy, and is really sometimes these things come up, like the issue of gender issues that we see here and there, some of the crises, like the Boko Haram crises, we see them here and there, and these help us to understand that the democracy being practiced, especially in Nigeria, is not really the Western type of democracy, and is not really the ideal, does not conform to the ideal of democratic tenets whatsoever. The problem that is we face in this time is that of misconception. Okay, that many Westerners tend to be in a hurry. They tend to misconceive the situation, and they believe that because we are practicing democracy, we are suddenly at the point in which they are in. Okay, and some of them, because they believe that they have come to Africa and they have imbibed some of our ways of life, and they believe that okay, there is a correlation. I've tried to say that throughout this talk, and of course we know that that is not true. Okay, that is not true. There's centuries and centuries of gap between what is practiced in most of Africa and what is practiced in the West. Okay, and that is why sometimes we see conflicts arise, like the one going on right now in the US, and some parts of the world, that are instigated by what some people feel as the inroad of African beliefs back into the West, But the main reason that I want to talk about today is the inroad of Western beliefs into Africa, because from the colonial period to now, there has been a huge shift in the Western system itself. And because of this, while Africa is still struggling to understand what the West brought in the first place, the West has moved on, because, so this is a problem, okay? This is really affecting Africa as it is right now. That is why we find a lot of misunderstanding within the generations. Okay, and somehow, yes, there's some similarity in that the Gen Z culture, okay, in the West tends to show the same confusion that we see here in Africa, where the children are not sure what they want. Do they want the culture, or do they want freedom of speech, freedom of association that democracy offers? And you see that there is a confusion because the culture does not promote those tenets of democracy. But the allusion to returning to culture is always there in the air, in the name of democracy. But the culture does not promote that. So how do you now, how do you now bring this to life? It is practically impossible. Okay, you can't say in the name of democracy, bring back something that rejects democracy. So this is the issue, this is the confusion, in most African countries right now, and it is also showing in the West. And some of the conflicts they are facing in the West are as a result of this, and a lot of conflicts we are facing as a result of this. Because in reality, while democracy is being put on the front burner, it is not being practiced in the home, okay? And of course, what type of democracy is it? Does democracy reject religion? Does democracy reject progress? No. Okay. So these are the conflicts. These are the conflicts that we have. Of course, a lot of us have said that children within a particular age range, children should be allowed to live within the belief system of their parents. And of course, because of the acceptance of democracy, when they grow to a particular age, yes, they can now choose and say, okay, I'm going to practice what my parents practice, or I'm going to do that. We are far away from an ideal democracy. And for me, I believe that maybe we should have gone a bit slower than we went. Okay, let's stop there. Let's stop the maybe or the what ifs. Okay, I would say, okay, we went the way we were supposed to go. We could have gone. Great. But what we need to understand is that there's a group of people that want to rush Africa, okay, by beating down on traditional Christianity, which is one of the parts that helps us to get where we're supposed to get. Okay, yes, and sometimes beating down on education itself. Okay, and there's an emphasis on politics, but politics is a one-track road. Okay, you can either go the way of force or the way of deception. We saw some people take the way of the deception. When you analyze the story of the man called Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, you would see the route he decided to take. Some people compare him with the Babangida administration. Of course, the Babangida administration was softer, rather more better. Mobutu was rather, you see what Congo is still in trouble today because of what Mobutu did. He delayed a process. Mobutu delayed a process, and because he delayed a process, the people, have risen up again. The same thing happened in Nigeria, okay? And there's an effort to reverse the progress that democracy has brought. But ours, we have a softer landing because, of course, the level of deception was less in our case, okay? But the politics is like that. You either apply force or you deceive, and that is the problem. So other options that you have is the Christian missions or social anthropology, and these are better methods, allowing the people to grow through gradual learning, gradual assimilation of cultures that they would themselves accept, voluntarily. So this is the issue, and we see that today, and that is why we discourage the Western culture being rushed on the people. Okay. If a person doesn't want something and you are with him and you want to take him away from a conflict region, do that. Okay. But when you support, like we've seen recently, when you support insurgency and you support rebel movements in the name of trying to move what the majority wants, and in essence it is not truly the majority, or even if it's a minority and you want to help them, I believe that we have seen in the Rwandan situation, of course, and in many other situations around the world, that this does not work. Okay, and we see Rwanda itself, intervening in the Zaire or the Congo situation because they have a lot of experience with that, and of course it's bringing a lot of problems here and there. But that is the truth of the situation. Human beings are complex beings. Okay, if you do not follow a systematic method of dealing with human beings, you will end up with a crisis you do not want. Okay, even the Ukraine-Russia situation is almost the same thing. There was a rush to implement certain things, and if the Ukrainians are regretting that rush, and the Americans are regretting it now, and now the Russians are also regretting it. So there should be a process, okay, where a very deliberate thinking, and most times commercialization takes over, political interests take over, and the people are rushed into what they don't understand, and they create problems. So this is the issue, okay? I am David Dungi Chinke for you today in Searching the Heart.
It's a long, long way back home. It's a dry and rusty path to where I belong. Come home, come home. I hear the trumpet, my heart rejoicing. I hear your voice, you're saying, come home, come home. I hear you calling, my heart is breaking.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with two insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth, and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.